Ian Rapoport just confirmed it. Stefon Diggs is cleared. The NFL closed the investigation and found no personal conduct violation. Runway's clear, but here's the question that stings. Why hasn't Adam Peters picked up the phone yet? While Baltimore's already circling, and while Diggs waits on his next team, another name already signed back in March and is only now showing why it might be the quietest steal of the offseason, OKONKWO. 56 catches last year with the Titans, and reports out of Ashburn have him looking explosive after the catch. But there's a third piece to that same story nobody's talking about, and it's about to change how you see David Blau's whole offense. And to close it out, the Bay is making moves. George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk publicly rolled out the welcome mat for DEEBO Samuel to head back to San Francisco, while Samuel himself is posting stuff that sounds like a goodbye to DMV. Is he gone, or does Adam Peters still have one more move up his sleeve? Diggs, OKONKWO, and DEEBO, all three colliding the same week. Let's get into it. Raise hail. Okay, let's start with the one that's had me thinking the most this week. Stefon Diggs is still unsigned this deep into the calendar, and for a receiver with his resume, that is not normal. When a player of his level is still sitting out there in late July, there are two ways to read it. Either the market is undervaluing him, or the market knows something we don't know yet. And honestly, in this case, it's both things at the same time, which is exactly why it's worth slowing down and breaking it apart properly. Let's start with the numbers, because that's the foundation here. Last season, playing for New England, Diggs finished with 85 catches, 1,013 yards, and 4 touchdowns, serving as the top target for rookie quarterback Drake May. That is a 1,000-yard receiver in the middle of his prime, one who was also the backbone of a rookie quarterback's passing attack. And he's coming off a torn ACL that cut short his 2024 season with the Texans, so the guy tore his knee, came back, and produced 1,000 yards the very next year. That tells me more about his makeup than any scouting report ever could. So why did New England move on from him after a season like that? The official answer is cap money, but the full answer includes something more uncomfortable, and I'd rather just say it directly instead of dancing around it. Diggs had a pending legal matter that complicated the Patriots' decision to keep him long term, and here's where I have to be fair with the complete picture, because this changed in recent weeks. Ian Rapoport reported that the league closed its investigation and found insufficient evidence to support a personal conduct policy violation. A jury in Massachusetts acquitted him on criminal charges tied to a former personal chef. A separate civil suit is still pending, but the part that could have cost him a league suspension is now resolved. That, for any team that was quietly waiting before getting close, removes the biggest obstacle standing in the way, and that's where Bleacher Report comes in. Analyst Christopher Knox named Washington as one of the two primary landing spots for Diggs this week, along with Baltimore. Knox's logic combines three things: roster need, local roots, since Diggs is a Maryland native, and Washington's hunger to get back to that 2023 level, the season that ended in the conference title game. Listen closely to this part, because I think it's the strongest argument of all. Jaden Daniels needs urgently a reliable second option behind Terry McLaurin. I am not making this up or exaggerating for content. It is the structural reality of this roster right now, and we're going to reinforce that in story number 2 today with OKONKWO. But at the outside receiver position specifically, behind Scary Terry, the depth is still a real question mark. Now, let's be honest and give the full context, because I don't want to sell you just the pretty part. This is, in the report's own words, a should happen prediction, not a will happen report. There are no confirmed workouts with Diggs yet, no leaked active negotiations. Knox also mentioned Kansas City as another team in the conversation, and we already know these veteran free agency rumors in the middle of summer tend to move fast once training camp starts and some team loses a receiver to injury. That's when the leverage shifts toward the teams, because the player can no longer afford to wait for the perfect contract. The Bills, just to give an example of how this market moves, already solved their receiver need in a completely different way, trading for DJ Moore from the Bears and adding Skylar Bell in the draft. That means the real number of suitors for Diggs keeps shrinking week by week, not growing. My honest take, and I want to be direct about this, I think Washington should move now, not wait. I know that sounds contradictory to what I just explained about market timing, but hear out the full argument. If Adam Peters waits for the market to sort itself out, he risks Baltimore, who also has a real need at receiver depth with Zay Flowers as their only consistent weapon, getting there first and closing the deal. Diggs, healthy and motivated by a year of proving to the league that his legal situation doesn't define his career, is exactly the kind of low-risk, high-ceiling bet a contention window roster like Washington should be willing to take. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Diggs also carries a reputation for locker room friction going back to his Buffalo days, where his relationship with Josh Allen became public and tense more than once. That's a real risk, and any honest analysis has to put it on the table. But in a locker room with the leadership maturity that Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels already provide, I doubt Diggs finds the same fertile ground for that kind of friction that he found in Buffalo. What feels undeniable to me is this. If Diggs ends up signing with Washington, David Blau's offense goes from having one elite threat and a bunch of complementary pieces to having two elite threats that no defensive coordinator can cover with a single scheme. That genuinely changes the conversation about this team's ceiling in 2026. Okay, bro, now let's talk about something that's already happening, not a rumor. Because while everyone's talking about who the Commanders might sign next, there's a deal that already got done back in March, and it's starting to show exactly why Adam Peters moved so fast to lock it up. OKONKWO signed a 3-year, $27 million contract with Washington, with a $7 million signing bonus and $16.7 million guaranteed. And when this deal got signed, the public reaction was pretty lukewarm. Nobody made much noise about it. But now, with the reports coming out of OTAs and minicamp, that quiet signing is starting to look more and more like a masterstroke. Let's go back to the context first, because it matters to understand why Washington needed this. Zach Ertz, who had been a steady, reliable presence for Jaden Daniels, suffered a brutal torn ACL in week 14 last season, and that ended his run as Washington's starting tight end. The Commanders first tried to go after Kyle Pitts on the market and missed. So they turned to OKONKWO, who was coming off 4 seasons with the Titans where he never had the offensive environment to unlock his full potential. And here's the stat that really grabs me. In each of his last 3 seasons, OKONKWO topped 50 catches, with 54 in 2023, 52 in 2024, and 56 in 2025, a career high. That consistently playing in a Tennessee offense that, to be generous, was a disaster of creativity and talent around him. Now picture that same player with that same consistency inside a David Blau scheme that actually knows how to use him. Bleacher Report called this signing the most underrated move of the entire NFL offseason, and honestly, I agree with that read. Analyst Alex K explained that OKONKWO works best as a move tight end, capable of lining up anywhere in the formation, and that his after-the-catch ability gives Blau a tool that Ertz in the final stretch of his career couldn't offer with the same explosiveness anymore. And this isn't just desk analyst theory. The reports coming directly out of practices in Ashburn back up the same narrative. People are describing OKONKWO as fast, explosive, and dynamic after the catch. Exactly the kind of description coaches don't hand out as an empty compliment. But fam, here's where the story gets even better. Because OKONKWO isn't the only new piece changing the face of this offense. Rachaad White, the new running back addition, is showing in practice exactly the kind of chemistry Jaden Daniels needed in the backfield. White already had a prior relationship with Daniels before arriving in Washington, and that connection has been clear since day 1 of OTAs. White's career numbers as a receiver are genuinely solid. 51.3% of his targets caught for 1,450 yards and 11 touchdowns across his career. That's a running back who actually knows how to run real routes, not one who just sits in the backfield waiting for a dump-off pass. And this connects directly to something that was already a structural problem with this offense last season. Under Cliff Kingsbury's scheme, the Commanders ran a ton of screen passes, but most of them didn't go for big yardage. The team finished 2nd in the league in receiver screens, but only 15th in tight end screens with just 2 all season, and 19th in running back screens. With OKONKWO and White now on the roster, that number has to change, because both are dynamic after the catch players with the burst needed to create separation quickly. ESPN analysts have already started calling this the right formula Washington found to make its screen game, which was a broken idea last year, dangerous in 2026. And there's still a third piece to this story that I don't think is getting enough attention, and that piece is Quentin Moore. Moore was a bit part player over his 5 years at Washington Huskies, went undrafted, and nobody expected his name to be part of the conversation in July. But the Commanders gave him $250,000 on his rookie deal specifically to guarantee themselves an extended look at him this summer. That's not a casual expense. With Ertz out of the picture and John Bates working mainly as a blocking specialist who can catch passes when needed, there's a real spot behind OKONKWO that Ben Sinnott, Colson Yankoff, and this same Moore are competing for in camp. Maybe OKONKWO and Bates end up being enough to close out that room. But if Moore manages to surprise in training camp, we'd be talking about an undrafted tight end earning a real role in a playoff caliber offense. Those are exactly the kinds of stories I love following closely as a fan. My honest opinion on this whole package, I think people still aren't valuing enough how much this offense is about to change purely from depth and versatility, without even needing one more signing. And if Diggs ends up arriving like we talked about in the first story, David Blau is going to have more playable weapons in 2026 than at any point in 2025. For a quarterback like Jaden Daniels, who already proved in his rookie season that he can maximize the talent around him, this should be exciting news for any fan who still had doubts after how rough 2025 turned out to be. And to close things out, fam, I want to tell you a story that's got a little bit of nostalgia and a little bit of discomfort because that's just how football goes sometimes. DEEBO Samuel is still a free agent this deep into the summer, and meanwhile his old teammates in San Francisco came week running a public campaign to bring him back to the Bay. George Kittle wrote on social media that he's got, quote, a guest house with your name on it. Kyle Juszczyk followed up with the joke, saying he's also got a guest house labeled DEEBO's second home. And Samuel himself posted on Instagram with the caption, let the chips fall where they may, which sounds exactly like something you write when you don't yet know where you're going to end up playing. Let's walk through how we got here, because DEEBO's time in Washington was short. But it wasn't bad. San Francisco traded him to the Commanders back in March of last year for a 5th-round pick in a deal that reunited Samuel with general manager Adam Peters, who he'd already worked with during Peters' years in the 49ers front office. Samuel arrived in Washington to reinforce an offense coming off a trip to the conference title game, with Jaden Daniels as the freshly minted offensive rookie of the year. The 2025 season, though, didn't go the way anyone expected. Washington finished 5-12, with Daniels playing in only 7 games due to a combination of knee, hamstring, and elbow injuries. In the middle of that collective mess, Samuel was, honestly, one of the few things that actually worked. 72 catches, 727 yards, 5 touchdowns, leading the team in all 3 categories, on top of 75 rushing yards and 1 more score on the ground. That's the performance of a guy who carried a broken offense on his back while everything around him fell apart. And yet, here we are, with Samuel still without a team. Why did this happen? The simplest explanation is that his contract with Washington was a 1-year deal following a restructure that dropped his cap hit down to $5.2 million for that season. That contract expired, and now, at 30 years old, Samuel enters the market at a moment where teams like San Francisco already spent their receiver money on Mike Evans and Christian Kirk, and also drafted Dejon Stribling in the 2nd round this year. In other words, San Francisco's receiver room is already pretty full, and any reunion with DEEBO would likely come in a reduced role, probably on a 1-year bargain deal, the kind the 49ers have used before with veterans in the late stage of their careers. What grabs me most out of all this is hearing Samuel talk about his own future. In a recent video he posted to his YouTube channel, he said, word for word, that he's going into year 8 and still feels like he's got, quote, 3 or 4 good years left. He also admitted that this free agency process has been, in his words, a roller coaster, checking his phone every morning to see if his agent messaged him about some team showing interest. That's raw honesty, the kind you don't always get from a player with his resume. And it's only fair to point out that since his All-Pro 2021 season, Samuel has averaged basically 60 catches and 730 yards per season, with extra rushing production that almost no other receiver in the league brings to the table. That kind of profile still holds real value in any NFL offense. Now, my honest take here, and I know this might spark some debate in the comments, I think Washington did the right thing letting him walk instead of forcing an expensive extension. Not because Samuel didn't perform, quite the opposite, but because the profile of the offense we're building with OKONKWO and White is already pointing toward younger players on more manageable long-term contracts, and potentially toward Diggs if the first story today plays out. Extending a 30-year-old receiver with the physical running and contact-absorbing style that defines Samuel's game would have been betting in the opposite direction of where this roster is building its contention window. That said, I completely understand why the fan base still has love for him. He was one of the only things that fought back during a season that honestly was hard to watch from start to finish. If he ends up back in San Francisco, I won't hold it against him. It's his career, and he deserves to close it out wherever feels like home. And that's everything I've got for today, fam. Look, we didn't have a single genuinely negative story today, and that alone feels rare after the year we just had. Diggs might be knocking on the door. Okonkwo, White, and even an undrafted rookie like Quentin Moore are building an offense with more layers than at any point in the Adam Peters era. And DEEBO, even though he's not wearing the burgundy and gold anymore, walks away with his head held high after carrying a broken team on his back. This franchise keeps building piece by piece towards something big, and honestly, the more I break this down, the more I want August to hurry up and get training camp started already. If this video gave you something, hit that like button, subscribe, because there's more content like this coming every single day, and tell me down in the comments, would you sign Diggs right now, or would you wait to see what happens in August? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one. Raise hail, always.